Hello everyone, I'm going to read you a story. It's the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is a beautiful old story, and we can learn a lot from this story. Okay, here we go. One winter's morning, the Queen was sitting beside her window sewing when it began to snow. Snowflakes drifted like feathers down from the sky and settled on the window ledge. As the Queen watched them, her needle slipped and pricked her finger. 3 drops of blood fell onto the snow. "I wish I had a child," she sighed, "with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as the ebony wood of the window frame." 9 months later, the Queen's wish came true, and she gave birth to a baby girl. The King was delighted. "Let's call her Snow White," he suggested. But the King's happiness didn't last long. The Queen became very ill, and within a week she had died. He and Snow White were all alone. The King was desperately sad. He loved Snow White dearly, but he couldn't take care of her by himself. "A little girl needs a mother," he said. So after a year had passed, he decided to marry again. His new wife was beautiful, but she was also proud and vain. She couldn't bear the idea of any being more beautiful than she. She even had a magic mirror, just to be absolutely sure. Every day she would gaze into it and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror always answered, "You are my queen." Then the Queen was satisfied, for she knew that the mirror always told the truth. The Queen had nothing to do with Snow White while she was growing up. She detested children and wanted the King all to herself. So she didn't notice that as the years went by, Snow White became prettier and prettier. Her ebony hair tumbled down over her shoulders, framing her delicate face, and her red lips grew soft and full. Then one dark day, the Queen stared into her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" She folded her arms smugly, expecting the usual answer. But instead, the mirror replied, "You are fair, of course, my Queen, but Snow White is the fairest of all." "Snow White?" screeched the Queen. Her face turned white with shock, then purple with rage, and finally green with envy. "I don't make mistakes," she said. "You must have made a mistake," she said to the mirror. "I don't make mistakes," said the mirror calmly. "See for yourself." The Queen looked out of the window and saw Snow White chasing butterflies by the fountain. Her eyes narrowed. It was true. Snow White was more beautiful. Over the next few weeks, the Queen asked the mirror again and again, but the answer was always the same. Jealousy coiled around her heart like a snake. "I must get rid of her," she decided. Without telling the King of her plans, she called for the court huntsman. "Take Snow White into the forest and kill her," he ordered. "I can't bear to look at her any longer." The huntsman was horrified. "But Your Majesty," he began. "Don't you dare disobey me," she thundered. "In fact, bring me back her lungs and liver so that I can be sure she's dead." Oh, what a horrible lady. So early the next morning, the huntsman took Snow White with him. They rode over the hills until they reached a forest. Snow White chatted away happily, asking him about the animals and the trees. But the huntsman hardly said a word. Eventually they came to a part of the forest where the trees grew closer together. "Let's stop here," said the huntsman. They got down and he looked around nervously before pulling his hunting knife out of his belt. "Is something wrong?" asked Snow White. "The Queen has ordered me to kill you," he said quietly. Snow White shrank back in fear. "But why?" she said. "What had I done?" "I'm sorry," said the huntsman, hanging his head in shame. "I'm just following orders." Tears welled up in Snow White's eyes. "Please don't kill me," she begged. "I'll run away into the forest. She'll never know the truth." The huntsman's heart filled with pity. He was afraid for his own life, but he couldn't bring himself to kill her. Just then he saw a wild boar in the bushes. It gave him an idea. "Run, child," he urged, "but you must never come back to the palace or the Queen will kill us both." Snow White took a few steps. Then she stopped and looked back at him. "Thank you," she said softly. "You are a very kind man." The huntsman watched her disappear between the trees. Poor girl, he thought. What will become of her? Swinging back onto his horse, the huntsman rode after the boar. When he caught up with it, he thrust with his sword, piercing its bristly skin. The boar let out an ear-splitting squeal. As quickly as he could, he finished the creature off. Then he cut out its lungs and liver and took them to the Queen, so that she would think Snow White was dead. Meanwhile, Snow White wandered further into the gloomy forest. By now it was growing dark, and she was very frightened. She heard a rustle among the bushes and broke into a run. Snow White ran and ran, stumbling over tangled tree roots and jagged stones. Shadowy branches reached out as if they were trying to catch hold of her. She hardly knew which way to run, but she kept on going. Then at last she saw a pretty little cottage through the trees. She ran towards it and banged on the door. "Is anyone at home?" she panted. There was no answer, so Snow White pushed the door open. Inside there was a little table, surrounded by 7 little chairs. It was laid out for supper with a neat white tablecloth, 7 little plates piled up with bread and cheese, and 7 little mugs filled with frothy milk. How strange, thought Snow White. There must be lots of children living here. She hadn't eaten all day and was very hungry. "I'm sure they won't mind if I have a little," she decided. But not wanting to be rude, she helped herself to just a little bread and cheese from each plate and took only a sip of milk from each jug. In the next room, Snow White found 7 tiny little beds, all lined up in a row. After all the running she'd done, she was exhausted. "I think I'll lie down for a moment." She tried the first bed, but it was too short. The second was too low, the third too narrow, the fourth too soft, the fifth too hard, and the sixth too lumpy. Luckily, the 7th one was just right. She curled up under the covers and fell fast asleep. I wonder who lives there. A little while later, the door of the cottage opened and in marched 7 dwarfs. They realised at once that somebody had been there. "Who's been sitting in my chair?" demanded the first dwarf. "Who's been eating off my plate?" asked the second. "And stealing my bread," added the third. "And nibbling my cheese," said the fourth. "And using my fork," grumbled the fifth. "And my knife," protested the sixth. "And drinking my milk," complained the 7th. Then the first dwarf went into the bedroom and found a hollow dip in his sheets. He touched it and found it was still warm. "Who's been lying on my bed?" he cried out. Mine too, they each exclaimed in turn. But the 7th dwarf was scared, but just stared. "Who's this in my bed?" he said slowly. The other 6 dwarfs hurried over. There lay Snow White, with her skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony. "Oh," they all sighed, "she's lovely." Snow White woke up the next morning to the clattering of dishes and the sound of merry whistling. She popped her head around the door and saw not 7 children, but 7 dwarfs. At first she was a little nervous, but they were so friendly and welcoming that she soon felt right at home. They all had breakfast together and she told them her story. "Your stepmother sounds like a nasty piece of work," they said when she finished. "But never mind, you'll be safe here with us." After breakfast, the dwarfs slung their pickaxe over their shoulders and set off into the hills to dig for gold. "Don't answer the door," they warned. "Your stepmother might come looking for you." "I won't," promised Snow White. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the Queen didn't suspect a thing. The huntsman had given her the boar's lungs and liver, and she believed that Snow White was dead. She went to her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" "You are the fairest here, my Queen," began the mirror, "but Snow White is the fairest of all." The Queen stared in disbelief. "But Snow White is dead," she said. "No, no," replied the mirror. "Snow White is alive and well. She's living in the forest with the 7 dwarfs." When the Queen realised the huntsman had lied, she was furious. Muttering to herself, she paced up and down in front of the mirror. Soon she came up with a plan. She disguised herself as a peasant woman, filled a basket with silk ribbons, and set off for the dwarf's house. Snow White was busy cleaning the cottage when she heard a knock at the door. "Pretty little things to sell," croaked the Queen. Remembering the dwarf's warning, Snow White peered out of the window, but when she saw that it was just a harmless old woman, she unbolted the door. "My dear, I've just the thing for you," said the Queen, pulling out a long red ribbon. "Here, try it on." Quickly she looped the ribbon around Snow White's waist and laced it up. She pulled tighter and tighter until Snow White could no longer breathe. The girl turned pale and collapsed on the ground. "That's dealt with, the little fool," sneered the Queen, and hurried back to the palace. When the dwarfs returned a little while later, they were shocked to find Snow White lying on the ground. For a moment they thought she was dead. Then they saw how tightly the ribbon was tied. One of them whipped out a pocket knife and cut through it. Snow White spluttered and sat up. "You've saved my life," she gasped. When Snow White had recovered, she told them about the old woman selling ribbons. The dwarfs shook their heads. "That must have been the wicked Queen," they said. "If she finds out you're not dead, she's bound to come back and try again." "I know," whispered Snow White fearfully. "I'll be more careful in the future." By now the Queen was already back in the palace. She rushed straight to her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" she demanded. Once again the mirror answered, "You are the fairest here, my Queen, but Snow White is the fairest of us all." "What does it take to put a stop to that girl?" hissed the Queen. The next day she returned to the cottage with a new disguise and a poisonous comb. "I'm afraid I can't let you in," said Snow White when she knocked at the door. "I understand," said the stepmother. "You can't be too careful these days." She held up the comb and gave a sinister smile. "Still, there's nothing to stop you from looking at my wares." "No, I suppose not," said Snow White, opening the door just a little. The Queen pushed forward. "Here, let me untangle your hair," she said. But the moment the comb touched Snow White's head, the girl slumped to the ground. As soon as the dwarfs saw Snow White, they realised with horror that her stepmother had visited again. They found the poisonous comb and pulled it out. Snow White's eyes flickered open. "My head hurts," she murmured. "Your stepmother has been up to her tricks again," she said. They said, "You really must be more careful. While we're out, don't open the door to anyone." "I won't," promised Snow White. When the Queen got home, she hurried to her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" she asked eagerly. Yet again the mirror answered, "You are the fairest here, my Queen, but Snow White is the fairest of all." "What?" shrieked the Queen, trembling with rage. "That wretched girl! I'll finish her off. It's the last thing I do." She mixed together all kinds of potions to make a deadly poison. Then she took an apple and dipped the rosy red side into the mixture. "You won't get away so easily this time, my pretty Snow White," she muttered. Then she put on a new disguise and hurried to the dwarf's cottage. When she knocked at the door, Snow White didn't answer it. "I'm sorry, I can't buy anything today," she called. "I'm not selling anything," said the Queen quickly. "I've picked so many apples I can't eat them all. I thought you might like a few." "Oh, I see," said Snow White, opening the window. "Well, it's very kind of you, but I'm afraid I really can't accept them." "Are you afraid I'll poison you?" chuckled the Queen. "Look, why don't you share one?" She cut the poison apple in two and ate one herself. Ate half herself. Then she held out the rosy red half. It looked so deliciously juicy that Snow White couldn't resist. She reached out and took it, but no sooner had she bitten into the apple that she collapsed on the ground. "Let's see who's the fairest now," crowed the Queen. Soon the dwarfs came home and found Snow White. "Not again," they groaned. They checked for 2 tight ribbons and poisonous combs, but they couldn't find what was wrong. "The wicked Queen has killed her," they sobbed. Meanwhile, the Queen stood in front of the mirror triumphantly. This time she was sure she had killed Snow White. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" she said. Sure enough, the mirror answered, "Now that Snow White is off the scene, you're the fairest of all, my Queen." "Just as it should be," she said with a hollow laugh. Back in the forest, the dwarves were still weeping. They couldn't bear the idea of burying Snow White under the ground. So instead, they made a glass coffin and put it in the garden among the flowers she loved so much. Each day, one of them would keep watch over her coffin while the others went to work. Months passed and Snow White didn't change a bit, even in death. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips were as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. Then one day, a young prince rode by. When he saw the coffin, he stopped and got down from the horse. "Who is she?" he whispered, kneeling down beside her. "It's our beloved Snow White," answered the dwarf who was guarding the coffin. "Beauty like this belongs in the palace," said the prince. "Let me take her with me." The dwarf shook his head. "We wouldn't part with her for all the world," he said. "Then I will stay here too," said the prince. When the other dwarfs returned, they felt sorry for the prince. "It's true," they admitted sadly, "she doesn't belong here." So eventually they agreed to let him take her to his palace. The prince sent for his servants to carry the coffin. Carefully they picked it up and put it on their shoulders. But as they set off, one of them stumbled on a tree root. The jolt dislodged the piece of poison apple from Snow White's mouth, and out it flew. To the dwarf's astonishment, her eyes opened. "She's alive!" they cried. The prince opened the lid of the coffin and gazed down at Snow White. "Where am I?" she said in confusion. "Don't worry," said the prince gently. "You're safe now." Snow White looked into the prince's kind eyes and smiled. "I don't think we met," she said. "He's a prince," interrupted the dwarf who'd been guarding her. "I think he's in love with you." The prince blushed. "I must admit it's true," he said. "I can't bear to leave you. Will you come home with me to my palace?" Snow White glanced at the dwarfs and they nodded their encouragement. "I'd like that," she answered shyly. She hugged each of the dwarfs in turn and said a tearful goodbye. Then the prince swept her up onto his horse and they rode away together. A few weeks later, the prince and Snow White announced they were getting married. The happy news spread quickly, and there were celebrations all across the land. But one person wasn't at all happy. The queen stormed to her mirror and demanded, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" There was a pause. The glass misted over, and there before her appeared Snow White and her prince, with rose petals showering down upon them. "Snow White is the fairest," answered the mirror firmly. "Of that there's no doubt." The mist faded. The queen saw her own face staring back, hideously twisted with jealousy. "No," she screeched, hurling the mirror across the room. As it smashed, a piece of glass flew out and pierced her wicked heart. "I knew that girl would be the end of me," she wailed, and she sank to the floor, stone cold dead. Well, I think that story's changed a bit because we always learned that the prince kissed Snow White, but in these days we don't kiss, do we? That's a beautiful story.